Hello, everyone. My name is Ibrahim Helmi from Al-Khawarizmi Research, and I'm extremely excited to delve into this really important, probably one of the most anticipated presidential election in the history of Somaliland. In this landscape of the global politics, this election that is going to be in November in Somaliland really is going to bring a lot of focus on it. And the best person that I'm really quite honored to come and talk about it is Moustafa Ahmad. Now, Moustafa Ahmad is a researcher who writes about the politics and security of Somaliland and in the Horn of Africa. Moustafa worked with local and international organizations globally, drawing on his training in political science and international relationship. He is currently in the early career scholar at the United States Institute for Peace, researching on Taiwan, China engagement in the Horn of Africa. Moustafa, thank you so much for joining me, and I'm equally excited to have you on this special podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess the first question is for people who maybe don't understand the landscape in the Somaliland presidential election. So maybe if you just give us a bit of background, crystallize some of the history of Somaliland in general when it comes to the election.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me in this great broadcast. And I'm really excited to talk about something that's really important, not only for the Somaliland people, but also like people in the region and the Horn of Africa. As you know, Somaliland is a multi-party democracy, striving to become a better version of itself by the day, but also like it faces huge challenges. What we see in Somaliland is a system of multi-party politics that's very locally grounded and based on cultural and local traditions of the Somaliland people. Now, the system has been going on, the multi-party system has been going on for the last 20 years or so, since the adoption of the constitution of the country, which stipulates that Somaliland is a democratic state that centers its political system on multi-party democracy. Now Somaliland is facing, so far it had 8 elections. This is going to be the 9 elections we're going to have. We had 3 presidential elections, 3 elections for the local council, and 2 elections for the parliament. Now we're facing elections that's very highly contested. The stakes are very high, and it draws on different political parties that we have, which is 3 parties nationally, but also we have political organizations that aspire to become a political party. And I'm going to explain that a bit for those who don't understand how the system works in Somaliland.
Definitely. I think there's so many topics that we could cover, and hopefully we could put them all in one episode. Maybe we could add it to the second episode started, because there's so many issues that we could discuss. But I guess for me, what I would like to really to explain to our viewers is what issues shaping this upcoming Somaliland presidential election. What do you see? Do you think the economy is part of it? Do you think the recognition? Do you believe the region stability is also a big factor that will shape the presidency in this upcoming election?
Well, I think it's a mix of all of these things you mentioned. One of the key issues in these upcoming elections is the country's economic situation. Somalia has been hit by a huge economic crisis and inflation, and living standards are becoming more expensive. But also you have to understand the country is facing massive unemployment. 75% of the population are young people below the age of 30, and having unemployment rates above 70% is very alarming and very problematic to the economy of the country. But also Somaliland faced the COVID-19 pandemic, and the last thing that impacted the economy hugely was the burning down of the Wahen market in central Hargeisa, which was at the very heart of Somali economy. So economy is the one big factor shaping the elections now.
Yeah.
Another major issue in this elections is the prospect of recognition and international relations as a result of the agreement Somalia had with Ethiopia. So far, there's no binding agreement. There's a momentum of understanding between the two sides regarding the sea access and recognition for Somaliland, respectively. Another major issue the country is now dealing with is security and stability. Unlike previous elections, security is at the very top of the issues shaping these elections. And obviously, it's the result of the conflict in the eastern region of Seoul. But also, we facing a bigger regional crisis when it comes to the Red Sea and the resurgence of piracy in other parts of Somalia and the Houthi attacks on international shipments. So
Yeah.
it's a mix of all these things. But yeah, it's very high stakes elections, I would say.
Definitely. And I think we're going to delve into those kind of topics. But what I would like for you is really to go through the three major parties. So we've got the Kulmiye, who is now it's been in power probably more than I think 10 years. I think, and also we've got Watani also, and also we've got Oud. But I just want to take you to an article that's been written by Abdi Jama, who is from the Somaliland.com, and he described the presidency period of Mr. Bihi, and I quote, non-visionary leadership. And he continued, under the leadership of President Colonel Moustafa Ahmad, a stark contrast in the quality of governance has emerged, profoundly affecting not only internal dynamics, but also regional relationship and aspiration for international legitimacy. So for you, as an observer in the Somaliland political landscape, do you feel this kind of statement makes sense?
Well, I think it captures some of the things observed during the bihi administration. And I should mention also that the government led by Musa Bihi faced huge issues in the country. There was a drought at the beginning of his term. Then the COVID-19 pandemic happened, and then the market fire, as I mentioned. That being said, his term is also marked by engaging politics of confrontation and tensions with domestic political actors, primarily opposition parties. So the country oversaw a long and problematic disagreements over the timing and the process of elections, term extensions, and so forth. So, and this sort of resulted in increased polarization in the country, not seen for many years, actually. And I think some of the things that described in the article you quoted, it exacerbated during his administration. It was also existed pattern that's shaped and somehow affected the performance of previous governments. So we have a systematic problems and structural problems in Somaliland that we need to address to change that. But now also Bihi is building on his performance in his period, saying I've led the country to its history, sort of development and all this things going on. Opposition parties obviously disagree with that and criticize his performance. And I think there's a sign of healthy democracy to keep the leaders in check and criticize and basically shed the light on the performance.
So let's take each party on its merit. So let's start with the leading the current government of Musa Bihi. For the last, what's your observation? Do you feel that his government done its best? Yes, you mentioned that there was a lot of challenges from the drought, from COVID-19, and some other elements. But why do you think now there is a momentum that it looks like it's going to be a very close election with Watani? But do you feel do you feel this kind of frustrations really? I guess what I'm saying is, did he really fail to reach the expectation of his own people?
Well, I think based on what I've seen from the politics and the oppositional momentum building up against him, um, it definitely shows that the general disapproval of his performance in the office. And I think that's what drives this very close competition and challenge pushed by the major opposition party. Um, and I think there's always this disconnect between the promises the parties make during the campaigns and the actual things they deliver. And when it comes to Moses' case, the record is not it's not so good, if you like, when it comes to living up to these promises he made. When it comes to other candidates, if I can mention that, he's facing a very potent challenge from Abdurrahman Erro from Watani opposition party, and that is the biggest opposition party.
Yeah.
Erro is a former speaker of the parliament and a former diplomat, and he saw Moses' term as not good for the country. I mean, all opposition figures make that case, don't they? I mean, they
Exactly.
highlight how things, and yeah, he managed to build a coalition of the many political actors sidelined during his term, and that's why he's building a strong case against Musa. The third candidate I would like to mention also is Faisal Ali Warabe from U'id Party.
Which is quite
The
interesting
justice,
because he's been called by so many analysts the Trump of Somaliland, which I think is quite ironic.
exactly. It's very interesting because
Very outspoken.
U'id, U'id, when it comes to the competition, it doesn't pose a significant threat to either Watani or Kurmiya Party. Pretty much because of the style of the leadership of the party. People do say that Faisal controls the party by himself. The
Yes.
party starts with him and ends with him. U'id is Faisal, Faisal is U'id. And I think that kind of
Can I
paints.
just come in here and just really to reflect on what you said about U'ud and Faisal? I mean, probably this is, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't this the fourth time that he's putting his hands up for the presidency?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
we're talking about that is 20 years of his party
Yes.
electing him.
Yes.
I mean, that should speak volume about the transparency and that his
Exactly.
own party practice, that you couldn't find any other
Exactly.
suitable candidate except him.
Mm.
So
Exactly. Well, looking at it is a very interesting picture because on one side you see a party that's known for its emphasis on Scandinavian-like type of welfare state, prioritizing citizens' well-being. So he talks a lot about providing healthcare, education, food. Even during the campaign, he was campaigning on saying, "I'm not going to pay people money. I'm going to pay sadaqah. I'm going to give money to the people in the hospitals." So
okay.
on one side, you see like this kind of like a messaging that prioritizes welfare, delivery services, and promoting people's well-being. But also he has a very nationalist messaging throughout his discourse. And I think that's why people like to call him the Trump of Somaliland. I wouldn't call him that, but I think
He's got his own style. Yeah.
Yeah, he has his own style. The parties, I would like to add this point as well. The parties we're talking about all faces issues relating to inter-party democracy. There's no significant challenge to Erdo's candidacy within his Watani party. There's no challenge within the ruling Kurmiya party to Musa's candidacy. And definitely there's no challenge or competition against Faisal in his party. Faisal has been basically the same chairman of the party since its establishment for 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I think the parties have this problem of less emphasis on delivering campaign promises and political program that's very clear and solid, and
Yeah.
it's more like based on traditional clan negotiations and alliance building.
And we're gonna,
that
and we're gonna discuss clan and tribalism because I
yeah.
think that is
Okay.
it's quite
Yeah.
a big topic that we could discuss. But I just want to go back to Watani, for example. I mean, they just recently,
Yeah.
a few weeks back, released their manifesto for the upcoming election, and
Yes.
they emphasize a lot on nationalism and investing back into health and education. I think that's what always been the values of Watani, the putting the nation first and investing money. So they have this kind of labor narrative behind it, where unlike Mousavi and his party, that is which rampant with corruption, and we could talk about that. But do you think
Yeah.
bringing anything new to, especially to the, as you mentioned earlier in your discussion, which is the the bigger demographic of our community in Somaliland are the youth. So do you think he
Yeah.
resonate with his policies, or I mean, what he's actually trying to deliver?
I think I think unfortunately with it, the fact there's no internal party democracy in Irid undermines all this beautiful and promising campaign ideas.
Yeah,
Um, if you run in the party for 20 years and there's no one challenging you and there's no strong central committee of the party, there's no other people other than you, then at some point people will not take you seriously. And I think it reflects
poorly on, yeah,
the fact
yeah,
like his performance in elections. Last elections he received only 4% of the votes. Only 4%. So I think this kind of shows like how people are not willing to listen, to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's really quite interesting. So, do you think having an internationally monitoring team to arrive in Somaliland will add value? I believe there were some teams who arrived in the last two elections. Do you think that's needed to kind of like legitimize what Somaliland trying to stand for,
Mm,
which is democracy? Do you feel an internationally accredited monitoring team is needed
mm.
in this, especially in this really volatile upcoming election?
Well, I think international observers play a significant role in the elections in a positive way. To begin with, they act as a neutral and impartial actor in the electoral process. This gives elections some sort of domestic and international legitimacy, especially that our country not recognized by other international bodies. So it gives us some sort of legitimacy. Secondly, they offer recommendations to the National Electoral Commission, the political parties, and the government on the reforms needed to be done to mitigate electoral crisis. And third, as I mentioned, they publicized Somaliland's democratic credentials to the outside world. We had electoral observers from South Africa, European Union, and other countries, primarily from the West. In the last election, for example, we had the electoral observation team compromising for former presidents of Sierra Leone, former president of Nigeria, and leaders from Zimbabwe and other countries observing the elections. And they've written an excellent report about the elections. One of the things they mentioned in that report was how elections in Somaliland is very unique in the Horn of Africa region, and how it should be recognized by the world and especially supported, particularly by the African states. Now, what we have is international observers coming to the country for all these years. We had international observation mission who came in the first presidential elections we had 2003. They came in the parliamentary elections 2005. They came in the presidential elections 2010, and then they came again in the local council elections 2012. They came in 2017 elections, and then they came lastly in 2021. So there's been consistent presence of international observers who always written report, and it's a standard practice in the globe, especially in the developing countries, because there's a need to improve the democratic process. But also, like Abdurrahim, I want to mention something. We don't only have an international observers, but also we have domestic observers that's very active and very well organized. For example, local civil society active manage over 700 domestic observers who are deployed in all polling stations. And they are very relevant because they have an access to all remote polling stations that otherwise not accessible to international observers.
Yeah.
The problem is, unfortunately, African Union doesn't send observers to Somaliland because they believe deploying international observers from the African Union will amount to
Yeah.
recognizing Somaliland
Will legitimize, yeah.
statehood.
Yes.
It will legitimize the process. But I think you can find, and I'm happy to share, dozen reports published by all these institutions. And it's very interesting because South Africa had always been a leading part in sending observers missions. So the last group we had compromised of heads of states of other countries, but the institution is like pretty much based in South Africa. So yeah.
Sure. I think we're going to go back to the regional dynamic and relationships on this election in Africa. But I'm gonna really just take you back to for what I've been observing for the last few months during this election campaign, which I was following them through articles and through certain videos and all that. What really strikes me, and I don't know whether you've been following the same thing, is when you hear all of those presidential candidates, whether it's coming from the president, Moustafa Ahmad, or the other candidates, when they articulate their point of view, when they trying to do the campaign, there was a lot of emphasis into clan affiliation and tribalistic support from their community or from their rally. So, do you believe clan impact and tribalistic affiliation still plays a big role to shape the upcoming election? Because if Somaliland trying to send a message to the world that we're a democratically elected self-sustained country with electrical and democratic values, but deep down inside you could sense it that it's about tribal or clan affiliation. Do you feel this kind of judgment makes sense?
I think it makes sense. And I think it's like the role of clan identity and clan mobilization in the electoral process undermines what Somaliland is trying to achieve as a viable and democratic entity. One of the major aims of establishing parties, and it's there in the constitution, is to prevent people from organizing themselves into regional or clan bases. Unfortunately, what we have here is a situation where the clan pretty much shapes everything in the parties.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's the only factor that shapes, but it somehow plays the dominant role. Sometimes business interest comes into hand, and sometimes it doesn't. Business doesn't know clan; it just needs an interest and
But Mustafa, can I just interfere here? Can I ask when the last time you hear bihi or other candidate talking about health policy? Making sure that we're going to invest money into this sector. When the last time you really hear them breaking down the budget, making sure that what they're saying is going to really bring a bit of peace of mind for the average Somalilanders that in the next 5 years. I haven't heard none of them. I haven't heard none of them talking from that perspective where brings,
I agree. They don't speak because at the end of the day, what gives them the votes is not the programs they sell to people, is the deals they make with clan elders and how they manipulate voters to vote for them. And unfortunately, this is the system I'm mentioning, saying it pretty much shapes everything in the electoral process. At the end of the day, it's a problem that we face in other parts of Africa as well. Clan and ethnic identity is used as a sort of mobilization for leaders. And many scholarly work has been published about how ethnicity and clan identity shapes. This is not to justify the systems that we have in Somaliland that's not working for the people, but it's just like it show the limits of our democratic process. And I think if this is continue for the long term, this will eventually exhaust all the options that we have, or all the hopes we give into the electoral politics.
Yeah.
And I think this is a very major factor. Now we see more people not willing to vote because they don't see any alternative, or they don't see anything that's going to change from the system, because all these politicians are campaigning on clan basis. And this is, for example, shown by declining voter turnout. Basically, during the last elections, 2017, it was 78% of the voter turnout. During the 2021 parliament elections, it became 65%. You can see the numbers going low and low.
But
And based on the compositions,
Mustafa, this election will bring the numbers, because it's like I said, it's quite pivotal
yeah,
time in
yeah.
in so many different ways. Do you think the electorate now, especially with the impact of social media and discussion between now and then, do you think the impact of people really, especially I'm focusing also on the younger generation, do you think the attendance will be quite huge? And even if the attendance is huge, what do you think the aftermath of this election? Because a lot of people are fearing that is whatever party is going to come to power, maybe the other party will say, you know what, no, we're going to contest it. So the maybe it's not the fear of the election, is the aftermath of the election. A lot of people are quite concerned about.
I think I think it's a normal practice of elections. And every country goes through this cycle where people think whether parties will accept the results. Um, um, uh, I think Somaliland has a tradition of solving problems related to crisis. And there were other instances where the stakes were very high as well, the same way as it is now, and being solved through through legal means by courts, settled by courts, as happened in 2003. But also, like, there are other means people settle through compromise and consensus building. And I think that's something very important to be mentioned, because this is what makes Thailand unique and very different from other countries where post-electoral violence happened. I think the stakes is very high, and that makes more people engaged and concerned, and all at the same time invested in the electoral process. But I think also I don't think, unless other major thing happen, that is something I cannot predict now. I don't think there's going to be an outbreak of a major violence related to elections. Yeah.
Okay, now that would bring me to quite interesting topic, which is freedom of speech. For the last 5 years, we've seen a lot of articles from Journalists Without Borders, and talking about the unfair arrest of people who have a different thoughts about how Somaliland or the presidency of Somaliland, and we've seen so many incidents. So I guess my question is, do you think Musa Bihi understand the freedom of speech, which still have a ceiling cap on it, but do you think he failed in that sector?
I think the government's record when it comes to arresting or the freedom of speech is not good. That's my overall assessment, and I think follows a pattern where political leaders decide to confront and how can I say, all like impose their version of truth to the people and not willing to listen to other actors. It's not something that started with Muse, and I think it's one of the things. I think there was a continuation from previous governments. Always used the police and the state power to silence opposing opinions. But what we see here is a trend that became quite repetitive and regular in Muse's government. Basically arresting journalists, activists, politicians. It's not a healthy sign for democracy, and I think it shows how seriously we need to take the issue of good governance and accountability. Because when there is a weak state institutions and institutions that can hold the government accountable, you will see something that like this happening over and over. But I think it was the general trend was this was an increase, and it was very unfortunate thing in Somaliland lately.
Yeah, definitely. And just another question: how do you think the women in general representation in the parliament? Do you think we're going to have good number? Because I think Somaliland's been it's been consistent having female member of parliament or councillors joining. So do you think this momentum will continue?
I think when it comes to the record of participation of women and the role they play is very unfortunate and very bleak and very bad. Why I'm saying this? Because we had parliamentary elections in 2021, and then no female member of parliament has been elected by the voters. None. So that's very sad picture, and it shows how the system needs to be reformed. But also encourage other actors like youth, women, and marginalized communities to take a leadership role more proactively.
Yeah, awesome. And just another question is, what do you think are the key factors that voters will consider in this upcoming election? I know we talked about it earlier, but from my experience from visiting Somaliland recently, what I've seen from speaking with the youth, and as you know, Moustafa, that when the youth start to leave your country, they are the backbone of your community. They are the backbone of your nation. And we've seen that, a lot of them leaving the country in drones. And from speaking to them, what's the element that really struck with you from speaking with the younger people there? What really strikes you, and you feel actually this is a really important element and point that the government needs to listen to?
I think what strikes me the most is the general disillusionment with the system. How basically the system is not catering to the needs of the young people. Issues like job security, economic advancement, and general progress in other living standards. I think this is the very, very key and the very core of these issues. But at the same time, what we see is a frustration of the young people because they are excluded from political decisions. It's always the elders and old men who call the shots, who decide things, who shape things. And I think that what we saw in last elections, we had the local council elections and the parliament elections, we saw young people's frustration with the system, where they voted for two candidates who were voting on performance-based politics and non-clan or regional platform. The mayor of Hargeisa, he won 26,000 votes, and one member of parliament won 20,000 votes. And they had one thing in common. They were campaigning on their platform was basically, we need to develop the country. We need to be united. We need to change the system. We need to reform things. We don't need to use tribal or clan affiliation to change things. And I think this kind of like, it was a testament of how young people are feeling frustrated and disappointed, if you like, with how things are going. And I think these are the key factors shaping how youth see themselves develop in terms of economic situation with jobs, with being able to afford the living standards of the country. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the sentiment that I've heard from speaking with a lot of the young people. You know, talking about clan and tribalism become rampant, become so rooted into government levels. I mean, obviously, unemployment still one of the highest.
See now.
So, Mustafa, just to recap on the last question, which is, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here, and I want you to imagine now how the election is going to turn up. So, from your observation on the landscape in Somaliland, who do you think have a better chance from speaking with the local community there? Do you think or this term might have a better chance to to come to power?
I don't think so. Now, based on what I see, talking to people, but at the same time, the kind of activities going on by the parties, the one that shows one sign of activity and high chances is the Watani opposition party. And I think they have a very high chance of winning the elections this year. Because number one, they build on the failures and the track record of Muse. So they highly publicized and highly built on how he underperformed, basically. So that's one thing. But secondly, they managed to gather all these political opponents and groups that are sidelined or marginalized during bihi's presidency. So basically, they have these two factors. And the third one, and I think this is the prominent ones, they kind of playing, they are in the upper hand when it comes to making deals with clan elders and making such kind of promises and these kind of deals. So I think what we're going to see these elections is a very strong competition against Muse, which there's a strong possibility that Watani will attain power. I don't see how things will change. I barely see any activity or campaigning going on, even though that officially campaign hasn't started yet. But other two parties are actively seeking to reach out to people, present themselves as suitable candidates. I don't see that still happening. The momentum with Beirut is still low.
Yeah, this is such an interesting time that we live in. Yeah, definitely. And I think there we're going to leave a lot of other topics. We haven't even discussed, the recognition, the issue of Las Anod, which is a very contagious topic. So I think that we could leave it for episode 2 to discuss that even further. But just finally, I want to really thank you, Mustafa, for your insight and your really engaging discussion in this important topic, which is the Somaliland election 2024. And I look forward to have a discussion on our second episode. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.